Coming to you from the studios of AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota. My name is JP Debragosian. You're listening to The Gailey Show. We are your answer to what is a queer thing that I can read, watch, or go to in the Twin Cities or Minnesota. And we have a very special thing that you can go to. We are welcoming today, my guest is Molly Ritchie. We're going to talk about an upcoming show that will be playing this summer. So, Molly Ritchie, welcome to The Gailey Show. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Molly Ritchie. I'm an actor and improviser and creator and director of many improv shows over the last 3 decades here in the Twin Cities.
So, Molly, tell us about your upcoming show.
Well, the show is called Family Funeral. It's a long-form improv show that actually created years and years and years ago, and this is our first production of it in 10 years.
Wow. So tell us so when you say family funeral, what is that? Is it is it a comedy? Is it
There we go. Sorry, you fell off of the thing. It is kind of a comedy. Over 20 years ago, I created an improv holiday show called Family Dinner, where basically you get to be a fly on the wall at another family's holiday gathering, and it was inspired by a bunch of things, including having done some research on the naturalists and how they were different than the realists. And I was like, in improv, the actors always have to mime everything they touch. What if they were actually eating real food? And so Family Dinner, we did over 20 years ago on occasional shows on off nights at the old Comedy Sports Space. And then I brought it to Huge Theater, and this holiday season will be our 15th year at Huge Theater. And with Family Dinner being a huge deal, I started toying around with the idea of, well, what a similar thing, but about a funeral and grieving, and what can we do with unscripted theater to explore these issues, and also, again, just theatrically, I was excited about a show where the audience and the performers would be sitting across from each other, directly facing each other for a good deal of the show, and also inspired by my grandfather's weird funeral. So yes, it's kind of a comedy. It's kind of not. We opened last Saturday, and it was fun to be in the back of the house and feeling the audience's discomfort, joy, perhaps bafflement, but also I think a lot of them left like a little bit changed, just because this is not what you expect when you go see improv.
No, yeah, it sounds so very human. All those different emotions and a different type of a show, exploring all of those themes that come up during a funeral. How does that work, though, in terms of, so are there, with this type of a show, are there particular like beats, like plot points that you want to get to, or is it literally like these are the scenarios and we're going to kind of go from there?
How it works, it's kind of like the structure of Family Dinner, except backwards. In Family Dinner, Act 1 is we get to meet all the characters, they're all coming home, we get to see them all interacting in various places in the house. And then Act 2 is one long scene that takes place at the dining room table, where they're actually eating food. This is kind of, Family Funeral is kind of this backwards, because all of Act 1 takes place in the church or community center or wherever the actual ceremony is being held. All takes place in a row of chairs, and we get to meet the characters, try and suss out a little bit about their relationships to each other, their relationships to the deceased, And then about partway through Act One, the actual ceremony starts, and we get to watch them watching the ceremony and occasionally getting up and doing a reading. And then Act Two takes place at the reception afterwards, which I think I just learned is called a repast if it's after a funeral, um, at one of their houses where they can further explore themes that were just minusculely brought up in the first act about relationships.
That's amazing. This sounds so interesting.
Uh,
And it's
yeah,
playing
well,
at the huge theater, right?
yeah, a huge improv theater, which if you've never been, or if you haven't been for a while, is in a new location. They last fall opened about 2.5 blocks north of where they used to be. They the huge improv theater, which is a nonprofit theater completely dedicated to the art form of long form improvisational theater. Somehow, this nonprofit, after a ton of fundraising, managed to buy a building that was for sale. They bought the art materials building. The family who owned art materials art supply store on Lindale and 27th um, decided that they were going to close up shop. They do almost all of their stuff, from what I hear, they do almost all their stuff online, and they are going to open a small storefront in northern Minnesota. But they were looking to sell the building, and so yes, the people at Huge Theater were able to actually buy a building, and now they're their own landlords.
That's amazing. That's
27,
amazing.
28 Lindale Avenue South. I don't know. You've got the internet.
We'll include it in the show notes and
Oh,
in our
good.
website. How did you come to directing improv theater?
I did a lot of improv. Um, well, basically, like right out of high school, a friend of mine got hired by Comedy Sports, which had just opened its Minneapolis location, and he said, "Well, I've got to go see a lot of shows. Do you want to go see some improv shows?" And I said, "Sure." And so I started going and seeing shows, and then not long after that was hired by Comedy Sports, and I just fell in love with improv, um, and had whenever I went away from it and would just be focusing on scripted theater, I would miss it so much, and a lot of a lot of improv, especially back in the '90s locally, wasn't terribly ambitious. I mean, there was like one form of improv back then. It was called The Herald, and it was written about in Truth in Comedy, which is a book about the teachings of Del Close. And that was like the only kind that was considered real art. Everything else was just, you know, light entertainment. But um, I think a lot of us start to look at like, wait, what can we do with this weird art form? This weird art form that the audience walks in not expecting anything from. They come in with low expectations sometimes, which can sometimes be a boon. But back in the '90s, so much of every improv show was explaining to the people who came and paid money and are sitting down in front of you what improv was. And now, luckily, especially at places like Huge Theater, you don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Family Funeral does not have a curtain speech. I don't go up and introduce it in any way. It just starts. And I absolutely love that about the show. It's just sit down and it begins. You don't need an introduction the way that you do for a lot of other shows.
Is there a queer take or a queer aesthetic that queer folks can bring to improv?
Can bring to improv? Is that what you asked?
Yeah. I'm just wondering if there's like a queer take on improv.
Yeah, there definitely is. There are. there are a lot of queer and trans folks doing improv right now. A lot of that is due to hard work that has been done by people um, in in the board over at Huge Theater, or people who, like me, just work with Huge Theater a lot. They do have a queer and funny improv festival every year where they highlight queer and trans groups here in the Twin Cities and also bring them in from around the country. This family funeral has, I'm trying to think, are we majority queer and trans cast? Um, we're either a majority or a plurality. I would have to sit down and count on my fingers and mumble names and possibly out people, so let's not do that right now. But yeah, there is definitely, all improv is theater where the script hasn't been written yet. That's all it is. And so because of that, it is wide, it's expansive, and um, it can be created and honed and loved by a lot of different groups of people. And it's nice to see um, so many queer and trans and two-spirit folks um, showing up on the stages in ways that they hadn't before. And again, a lot of that is due to the work of people people on the board at Huge Theater and other artists who have taken the lead, like the people behind the Queer and Funny Improv Festival.
What is it like as a director to be sitting or standing in the back of the house to see how it goes? Like, is it more nerve-wracking? Is it exciting? Like, what is that feeling as you're watching your cast perform the show?
Yeah, it is nerve wracking. It is exciting. I mean, it's not like directing scripted theater. It's, you cast amazing folks, and then I always say it's kind of like building a playground and then hoping that it inspires people enough. And they're the performers in this show are such a great mix of people, and they were really excited to try this. And so it is. We opened last Saturday, and then I performed. That was the 7:30 show, is Family Funeral, and then I performed with my group of other middle-aged people who've been doing improv forever at 9. And I was telling people before that, like, I don't get nervous performing anymore. That those days are gone. Um, I've done enough terrible shows that I'm pretty sure I will never be able to outdo myself with performances that are worse than I have done in the past. So, like, for me, and also for years, pre coming out, the improv stage was like the only place where I felt like I could be me. Um, but I get so nervous before a show I've directed is up. Um, it's it is that is nerve wracking in a way that I don't know. It's like, fly, little birds, fly, and oh, I hope that I taught them how to preen their wings correctly. And um, yeah, especially with a show like this, because this is a show where, as I told people both in auditions and in rehearsal, not only is the audience's laughter not your goal, if the audience laughs, is none of your goddamn business in this show. I want to see people relating and going through this thing that we have, generally speaking, each and every one of us has gone through. What is it like to grieve, and when is that absurd? And there's good places in the show for the audience to put absurdity into it, so we get to watch people dealing with the absurdity that can come up in what's supposed to be a very solemn occasion.
Well, thank you, Molly. This has been so wonderful to talk about Family Funeral. I look forward to having you back here on The Gailey Show. Please come back soon, and we'll talk all about your next production.
Oh, will do, absolutely.
Again, Family Funeral is now playing every Saturday at Huge Theater, and Huge Theater currently has a major fundraiser going on that ends this weekend. They've raised over $60,000, but their goal is $100,000 to support needed and necessary renovations to their new home. To donate and to buy tickets to Family Funeral, go to hugetheater.com. Well, I am very excited for our next guest here. Really, really interesting book, and our guest, David, has a really wild background that I'm hopeful that we'll get into as well in terms of writing and pop culture. So, David, welcome to The Gailey Show. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh my gosh, thank you, JP. Sure. My name is David Reddish. I am an author and a journalist, and I'm here today because I just had a new book come out. It's called The Wrath of Comic-Con, and it marks the third and final installment in a trilogy I've been working on for more than 10 years now.
That's right. Congratulations to be reaching that stage.
And, Thank you. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, you never know. You never know when it's actually going to be finished, like when you start something like this. So it feels very good that it's finally done.
Well, congratulations. And can you tell us, where should we start? Should we start with like the whole series, or should we start with the newest book that you can tell us about?
Well, I think I can dovetail both of those a little bit. So this is a series called the Comic-Con Chronicles, or more vernacularly known as the Sex, Drugs, and Superheroes trilogy. And it's the first ever series of books. Yes, please laugh. It's the first ever series of books set at the San Diego Comic-Con. And it's all about geek culture and creativity and what it means to be a fan in this day and age where Hollywood is just mining geek properties left and right. Star Wars, Star Trek, Marvel, the list goes on and on, right? So this series covers the same group of characters over the period of about 6 or 7 years. The main character is an aspiring writer, and he's also looking for love in Comic-Con, which may or may not be the right place for it. And the third book finds he and his friends reuniting. They have their first short film about to come out at Comic-Con, and a mysterious character arrives with the intentions of actually destroying him at the convention. So a lot of intrigue in this third installment, I have to say.
What does destroy mean? That could go so many different ways in Comic-Con land.
Well, that's exactly right. So to get into a little bit more detail about that, so this third book is very different from the other two in the sense that the first two are only narrated by one person. They're told in first-person point of view, so you kind of exist in this character's mind, and you understand his insecurities and his sort of modes of thinking a little bit better. This third book continues that, but there's also a second narrator now. So there's a parallel narrative. The original character's in 2012, living through it all. And, this other character is in 2047? So the distant future, and she lives in, a very dystopian future in which, toxic fandom has gotten to the point that it has actually kicked off real wars. And so she is somebody that hates all things geeky. And in doing her own research about this world that she lives in, she realizes that this one character that has been narrating the past two books is actually the key to all of this awful destruction starting. So I take a sci-fi approach to it, which is something that existed in the other two books, but I did have to turn up the volume a little bit here. So you have these two different characters whose journeys are sort of reflecting one another, who are sort of the mere opposites of one another, foils, if you want to throw out a sort of literary term there. And it's about the way that their thoughts sort of interact with one another, and eventually they do actually interact with one another, but I don't want to go into too much detail about how that happens. I think it's a fun twist.
No, yeah, no spoilers, no spoilers. Tell us, are there queer elements to it? I have to ask, since this is the Gailey Show.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, no, that's absolutely. The main character is queer. He's openly gay. Most of the characters are LGBTQ. That was something that was very important to me when I sat down to write the first book, because there was, at that time, I was writing it in the mid-aughts. There was still not a lot of representation. Certainly within, geek culture, there was no talk of queer people in geek culture. Now, those of us that were queer and geeks, we knew it was there from the very beginning, but it was not something that was openly discussed. The other thing, I guess, to say about that was with geek culture in the way that I had seen it portrayed in the media, in movies, in shows. This was pre-Big Bang Theory. It was sort of just before that time. Nothing had really ever done geek culture justice. It was always something to condescend to. So I wanted to write something from the other way around, where not only was it queer affirming, it was geek affirming. Because I guess as a queer geek myself, those two things are sort of linked in my mind for all time. So it was a way to sort of explore both of those elements in a really positive and affirming way.
So was Comic-Con something that was like a feat, like something that you were mesmerized by, or is it something that you like came to and you were a member of and then you started to write about it?
It was a little bit of both. You know, it's funny, I grew up, you know, pre-internet. I am that old. Pre-internet, we grew up, and there was not a lot of centralization of geek culture. That always existed around conventions, come to find out. But in the 21st century, with the rise of the internet and social media, and with the rise of convention culture, with Hollywood both starting the whole superhero revolution, where suddenly every superhero is getting 5 different movies. You have great geek works like Watchmen and Lord of the Rings. They're getting, you know, adapted to the screen, Harry Potter. Suddenly geek culture became mainstream, and thus so did Comic-Con culture. So the first Comic-Con I attended was in 2004, and it was massive. And I had grown up thinking, I've got to be the biggest nerd in the world, and then suddenly realized, oh no, I'm in way over my head here. Holy Lord. Oh my gosh, that first year it was just like, I know nothing. I'm going to shut up and just listen. But it was a wonderful experience, and you bond with all these people and the creators, you know, certainly convention culture in those days. It was, the creators were very much the Joss Whedons and the Frank Millers and the Gail Simones, all these people interacting very directly with their fans and having lots of dialogue and conversations. And it felt like sort of a family dinner around the kitchen table. It had a very, very modest feeling to it. That's changed radically, obviously, as more money has come into convention culture, as more geek properties have become more and more popular, and as it has become this sort of cornerstone of pop culture, the San Diego Comic-Con. It's a very different feel now, and so that's something I really explore over the course of the 3 stories as well. Just the way con culture itself has sort of evolved and changed.
Is there a particular genre that you always check out when you go to a Comic-Con? Like, is it particular, like comics or films or other things?
I mean, I'm a big movie nerd. And the fact is, I used to read a lot of comics. I was a big Batman fan, a big DC Comics fan.
Ooh, yeah.
But something happened. This is a much longer conversation for another time. Something happened there in the mid to late aughts where suddenly they just kept pushing the reset button over and over again. And so we were supposed to have a whole new continuity, but that was going to last, you know, for years, but that would last maybe 6 months. And then they were pushing the reset button again. And it was just, it's so exhausting to keep track of the continuity and the characters. And same thing with Marvel with their sliding time scale. You know, Magneto's a Holocaust survivor, but he's built like a ripped 50-year-old. And it's like, okay, he would be 90, you know, at this point. The sliding time doesn't make a lot of sense. The time travel, the alternate characters, you know, at one point, Iceman, a very popular member of the X-Men. There were 2 different versions of Iceman. One that had come out in the 2000s, but the other one was from the 1960s and had time jumped into the future. So you have 2 versions of the same person that are living out 2 different points in their lives. It's a lot to ask of a readership. It really, really is. Yeah. So I have since gravitated from the page to the movies, though even those have become questionable, and that's a whole other can of worms as well, in terms of what they do or what they don't do. I'm just there at this point, you know, it's become a big part of my career, going to these conventions, promoting my work, doing my journalistic work, conducting interviews and research on what's going on. So for me, it's definitely evolved. I'm now just there to be there and to sort of be a fixture of the convention, I suppose. I'm not there for any single thing anymore.
Wow. The Iceman thing really irked me. So I don't know who I was talking to. They're like, yeah, Bobby came out. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
No. And I would like research it and I couldn't find anything. And they're like, read this and this. And I'm like, oh, this is very confusing. I'll just stick with the Young Avengers, please. That seems to have a beginning, middle, and an end. And there's not like 17 different versions of them yet. And, you know, Earth 42 and 73 and all of that.
Give it time,
even
man.
Though, I know, America Chavez, I'm like, don't do that.
Give it
Don't
time.
have her like jumping between those. But wow, we're really good. No, we're not going to do that because I could do that with you.
Okay. All right.
Talk to me about, so you worked at QWERTY, correct? Talk to me about your journalism career.
Yes, I did. Very good. Yes. My journalism career, you know, it was something that I just really got very lucky and I fell into. I had started writing books. I had trained to be a screenwriter. And we had our big writer's strike in 2008 out here, which just sort of devastated the industry.
Yeah.
Kind of like the one we had last year has subsequently devastated the industry. So I started writing books because I figured those would be an easier sell than a script. And as it turned out, I was right. So by the time my second novel had come out, my second novel is called The Passion of Sergius and Bacchus, and it was nominated for some major awards. And it got me a lot of notice, and I'm very grateful for that. But it also opened the door to people who were suddenly looking at me going, you're pretty good. Can you write about movies? Which, of course, I've been waiting my whole life to hear that phrase. So I started journalism. QWERTY, I also got very lucky. My friend Jace Peoples was exiting the organization and suggested I take over as their entertainment editor. They didn't have much in the entertainment coverage department at that time, so I expanded what ultimately became the entire brand and what QWERTY does to encompass more celebrity interviews, encompass more representing the community, talking to community leaders, just sort of exploring the community in all its aspects. And the way that we're represented in pop culture was something that was very, very important to me. So at one point I was writing between 2,500 and 3,000 words a day for QWERTY, just to sort of stay caught up. It was a very, very exhausting experience, but I was able to explore so much. And, you know, I like pushing myself as a writer, so I found a way to do it that way.
I find 3,000 words like every 2 weeks to be, what were you writing about? Oh my God. That's a lot.
Everything, you know, when you have to write, cranking out at least one feature interview a day, I was writing 3 or 4 weekly columns, all of which ran, you know, 2,000 words at minimum, you know, some retrospectives on movies. You know, I had a weekly, it was twice a week. I was doing, you know, queer movies that people needed to check out, or movies with a queer twist, or something that was relevant to what was going on sociologically, you know, culturally. So maybe a movie about politics where queer life gets roped into it, or maybe a movie about this actor who just celebrated some milestone or something. I also was writing, which I don't think they do anymore. I had a weekly column called Culture Club, which was sort of an overview of all the big entertainment that was dropping in a single week. So all the movies, all the television shows, all the web series, novels, music. It was all kinds of things. And then the cocktail you were going to have while you experienced it all. So that obviously took a lot of research, not just on the cocktails. Took a lot of research. It took a lot of work, but it was very, very satisfying. And I know, I guess there's no way to say this without sounding like an egomaniac, but I know there were people that only read QWERTY specifically to read that column, which was very, very flattering to me. And it still means a lot that I connected with people that way.
Is it overstating it to say that, I mean, you sound like you helped grow QWERTY into the giant that it is today. I mean, it rivals our biggest, you know, print publications at the height of where they were at.
Yeah. Well, when I was there, we were actually, in terms of traffic, beating the print publications, in terms of readership. I also can say that on my watch, this is just a statement of fact, on my watch, our readership skyrocketed. When I started, I want to say we were doing about 6 million readers a month. It was more than 8 million, I know, when I left. And the revenue for the company, which is nothing I'll go into, but it had more than doubled in terms of ad sales. So I like to think I had something to do with that.
David, dang. Wow. That's amazing. So I have some more questions for you that I want to ask about, particularly around queer media, because you are well situated, I think, to answer them. But I'm running up on time here, so tell us, how can we connect with you?
You can find me on social media on Instagram. I am the Gay Magneto. That's all one word. Yes, Magneto from the X-Men. All one word. You can find me there. You can find my recent work on wealthofgeeks.com, where I am managing editor and lead film critic. So you can find a lot of my interviews, essays, and movie reviews that way. And you can find my novels at fine retailers, particularly Amazon.com. If you just enter my name, David Reddish, that's Reddish with 2 Ds, my author page will come up and you can have access to all of my work that way.
Perfect. Well, we are going to continue this conversation on our YouTube channel and everywhere that you stream your podcast or am950radio.com. David, thank you for being here on The Gaily Show.
Thank you, JP. Thank you to all your listeners.
And we can just continue on. I'll cut it out from there. But
Okay.
okay. So queer media, tell me, what do you think the state of it is now prior to when you started working at QWERTY?
The state of it now, iffy, maybe, I think would maybe be the best way to put it. This is an interesting conversation, JP, and it's one that I've had a few times. I feel like there really is always going to be a need for queer media, to reference, the kitchen table metaphor again. Like, that's where, as a community, we sit at the kitchen table and we can say things to each other we would never say in public because we love each other and we know each other. And, it's a way to sort of assess the state of the family. Unfortunately, what I've really experienced, and this is true in my last job, it's certainly been true since, is that, like all journalism, there is such a push for things to be monetized to to an absurd level. And so, what I think would be very valuable for queer media, fewer and fewer outlets are actually partaking in. They're focusing less on the state of the community, the less on the state of our rights, and more on the tabloid and salacious stories about, this actor's in the closet. This guy just showed his anatomy on Instagram or something, or somebody had a sex tape leak. Those are the kinds of stories I really didn't like covering. And I still don't like covering, under my tenure. I felt like they were tawdry and beneath our readership. And they weren't the kind of story that I personally wanted to read. So, I think there are ways to cover sexuality. There are ways to cover sexy people in the context of art without having it be just that or just something that would be masturbatory, right? Really, I mean, that's the word for it, right? Like, it's not true eroticism because you're not really connecting with anybody. I'm just oogling somebody. And that to me isn't really sexy. It's more akin to masturbation. Maybe this is the kind of kitchen table conversation I'm talking about, JP. We can talk about the difference between sexuality and masturbation, within the queer community. I think, there's still the other thing that I guess I have to say about this also is that a lot of queer media has become so grievance based. It's sort of poking the hornet's nest for the sake of poking it. Because when people are angry, they're more likely to read, they're more likely to participate, and that translates into the traffic, the eyeballs, the money. It's always the money, is the issue. So I think, with journalism as a whole, this is something we see kind of going on anyway. The more and more tabloid, stupid influencer actor stories, as opposed to there's a war in Gaza, there's a war in Ukraine, there's a coup in Myanmar, like the important things that are going to affect our lives in a much more fundamental way. I would like to see journalism sort of regarded more as a public utility, a public service, something that would maybe be not for profit. I'm a big supporter of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I was raised on Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers. I watch the PBS NewsHour now. So, shameless plug for PBS. I love it. But that's exactly, I think their reporting is excellent. And it's not a lot of talking head sort of analysis. These are the facts. This is what you need to know for his social and historical context. You decide what to think or what to feel based on that. It invites, I think, a much more active response from the viewer, the listener, the reader. And I think queer media should maybe take that kind of approach as well.
It's interesting you mentioned PBS because there's a great new documentary out, Butterfly in the Sky, which is about reading Rainbow. And for all of us kids in the 80s who were, learned to love books from reading Rainbow, I highly recommend that. And I'm also a fan because after that, I was looking into all the shows. I'm like, oh my gosh, I really did grow up on PBS. It was fantastic. GLAAD just put out a new report showing that the number of queer characters on TV decreased, like for the second year in a row, and pretty significantly off of last year. Like, what is your perspective on? Do you see queer characters in media kind of going down or kind of constricting in films and TV as you're writing about them?
Interesting. I think everything is kind of cyclical in this regard. We went through periods where there were a lot more women and sort of female-based stories that then gave way to people of color. It's cyclical. It's Hollywood always want to sort of reflect the moment, but the problem with that is it always takes Hollywood a year to do anything. So the moment is going to you're drawing the moment out, and things sort of are not in sync the way that I think they really should be. When it comes to queer shows, queer characters specifically, I don't think we're going away. I think we're finding our place in a broader society. I think broader society is trying to figure out, well, how do we fit queer people and queer life into a society that is not dominated by queer people. How do we integrate the issues that queer people raise about gender and sexuality and identity? How do we integrate those into a broader conversation about American identity or cultural identity? One thing that I've noticed is that shows that are directly about queer characters, a show like Love, Victor, for example, comes to mind, which was a spinoff of the movie Love, Simon. The show was very good, but it didn't seem to please anybody in the sense that I thought it was wonderful, but you have queer people complaining that that it's not gay enough, that it's not queer enough. You have people complaining that, it's about a male protagonist. Why is it not about a trans protagonist? Why is it not about a non-binary protagonist? Why he's a Christian, he's American, he's masculine presenting. The actors are straight people. Well, this is so reductive, and I'm going, no, it isn't. I've never seen a show about a gay kid in high school, finding love with his boyfriend and coming out to his conservative family before. I think this is wonderful. Or the other big criticism that it got was they're not having sex all the time. And it's like, well, I don't know what your experience was when you were 15. I was not having much sex as a little gay kid. So, I think it's a matter of everybody's trying to please everyone's trying to please too many people, but in the way, like maybe not pleasing anyone at all. It's complicated. I'll say that much.
It does feel that we keep coming from a place of scarcity, like this idea that we're only going to get one TV show, and so it's got to be everything, as opposed to trying to reframe it as queer abundance, that we get to have that and these other things. And it does, like the recent turn against Heartstopper, I was like, okay, I'm off the internet. Like, I can't, this constant knives out for everybody. I'm like, no. Like, we get to have these things and we get to have more. That's the point we should be doing, not, tearing down what's already there just because, I could go on and on about that as well, but...
Yeah, absolutely. Heartstopper's wonderful, and it's obviously, my mother, of all people, is the biggest fan of Heartstopper. I'm not into the show. She won't miss an episode. She could tell me everything that ever happened. It's interesting the way, I'll make this point just very, very quickly. We are not, even when we are, I think, the main characters in our own story is not necessarily being told for our benefit. It's told for the benefit of people that may not have anything to do with our story any other way.
Yeah.
So, I think bashing a show like Heartstopper, bashing a show like Love, Victor is really counterproductive and ultimately hurts us. It hurts the people that want to empathize with us, that want to know better, that want to root for a queer protagonist. I think just be happy when it's there, kids. Don't tear things down unless you have a really, really, really good reason.
Yeah, it reminds me of Bros. I don't know if you saw that, but there's this whole scene,
Christ.
the department meetings, of the museum where everybody's
Yeah.
going at each other, and then that like got reflected in real life and how that movie was like received in the community. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, he nailed it. Those meetings are exactly what's now happening to his movie. But David, this has been such a delight. I'd love to have you back. So when you got your next book
Anytime,
coming
man.
up, or you want to talk about your writing and stuff that you're working on, like, we'd love to have you. This is a great conversation, and I'm sorry that it has to end right now, but remind us, how do we connect with you in real life so that we can get your books and follow all of your other writing?
You can follow me on Instagram at The Gay Magneto. That's all one word. You can find my novels on Amazon and other fine retailers. And you can find all my journalistic work. My current journalistic work is at wealthofgeeks.com, the website that I'm managing edit. So,
Well, again, thank you very much, David, for being on The Gailey Show.
and my pleasure. Anytime, man. Thank you for having me.
Well, that is our show for today. Thanks everyone for listening and or watching. Our podcasts are executive produced by Jim Pounds. Creative and accounting support provided by Gordy Erickson. Production, distribution, and marketing support provided by Brett Johnson, Chad Larson, Laura Headland, and Jennifer Ogren from AM 950. You can find us on social media. Search for This Queer Book Saved My Life on Facebook. We're at This Queer Book on Instagram and at _Gailey Show. Follow us on Instagram for preview clips from upcoming episodes. For The Gailey Show, check out our YouTube channel, unless you're watching us there right now. We're also on AM 950's YouTube channel and Facebook page. As always, you can connect with us through our website, thisqueerbook.com. On our website, you can leave me a voice message of the current LGBTQ books, film, or TV you're loving right now. And if you send me a message, I will play it on the air to share with our community. Go to our homepage, thisqueerbook.com, scroll down, and you will see an orange box with a microphone. Click it and share your message of what queer media you're loving to watch or read. And if you have LGBTQ entertainment news with a Minnesota angle, email gayleyshow@thisqueerbook.com. That's GAILY show@thisqueerbook.com. And until our next episode, see you queers and allies in the bookstores.